Hello, we're live. Um, Good to be here with you all. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. That's why we put it in the title. Cecil is with us today. Say hi, Cecil.
Hey. It's
Sarah
weird that I'm
not
on the
with us
same
today.
size.
I know. Oh, that's because usually we have 3 people and you can feature one, but with 2 it has to be equal. Well, whatever. Sarah's not with us today. And so first of all, sorry for not being here last week, and especially for giving such late notice. Cecil and I had such strong intentions of making it work, even though it was a very inconvenient time, and we were wrong. Sarah tried to warn us. She said we should cancel the advance. We're like, no, we'll still do it. We were moving into our new offices last Wednesday. We've been talking about that for the past few weeks because the internet connection is much, much better here. And you can see the different backdrop. Not for Cecil, he is working remotely.
Still got my books and sewing stuff.
And it took us longer to move in than we thought it would. We thought it would be a morning thing, and it was longer than that. But we're in now, and we're excited, and this place is great. You know, I got windows on 3 sides here. It's very nice. But we're excited to be back after the week off. So sorry for that. Anyway, today we are talking about boundaries. Last time, 2 weeks ago, we had kind of briefly mentioned at the end the concept of reactive versus proactive boundaries. So that's our topic for today. And just as a reminder for how this works, this is just, around here, we kind of call it like our open office hours. This is just a conversation with the people who are here to talk about whatever the people who are here in chat want to talk about. Any questions, comments, anything at any point. We pick a topic just to make it easier to kind of prepare questions so that people aren't on the spot to have to jump in right away. And the topic this week is boundaries. Yeah, not just for countries. So yeah, did I say everything that needs to be said, Cecil?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to talk about boundaries. We'll start with, thanks to Cecil's pun, let's clarify what we mean by boundaries. I guess it's not a pun, just I don't know.
A ridiculous statement that's like a bad dad joke.
So when people talk about boundaries, they usually are talking about what we today are going to call reactive boundaries, which means someone or something is encroaching on space that I don't want it to encroach on, and so I stop it. Somebody is asking for too much of my time or energy. Some organization is putting too many demands on me. People are coming into my personal space that they don't belong in physically, or boundaries in that sense are like fences, right? Like I gotta identify what things are mine and are important to me, identify who and what is allowed into each of those spaces, and then kind of be the doorman and enforce those rules and make sure that the people and the things that are not allowed into this space don't get to come into that space. And, I guess that's kind of a generic way of describing it all. Probably makes it sound like a lot simpler than it is, because it really is a difficult and tricky thing to manage, even just on this level, the reactive boundaries level, to be able to identify, what are the things that I'm not okay with. Like all these things we talk about, you don't usually identify that until it's already been a problem. Like you don't identify that someone is taking up too much of my time unless they've already started taking up too much of your time. And then at that point, how to scale it back from what it is can be very tricky. And of course, being preemptive with this and anticipating like, okay, I need to not have any work calls after 5 p.m., for example. And establishing that boundary ahead of time is a lot easier to enforce. It's more complicated to predict, to spend your resources thinking about what are ways that things could potentially in the future impinge on my boundaries, is harder to do.
So like, how does that help with, so like, not last week, before we talked a little about anxiety and everything. So how does that where's that line between thinking too much about this and be like, okay, well, I got to prepare for everything and trying to be, get stuck in that procrastination and perfectionism before moving forward, or just being like, I don't know, in the moment or whatever. If that makes sense.
Meaning, like, I'm worried that if I do this thing, it will set me up for people to violate my boundaries, and therefore I'm not going to do it yet. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So you're like, oh, I have to set every boundary up and think about every situation, so I have clear boundaries, so I know. Because sometimes, we walk into situations and we're like, just think like, oh, and also like, there's something comes up, and they're also like, oh, we have that boundary, and we didn't realize it until, something, a stimulus, provoked that, and also it's like, oh,
Right.
so like, how do we exist without constantly like, okay, let me think about everything that could possibly happen, and establish these arbitrary, preemptive boundaries, and then walk in with a list to everyone and be like, here's my list of boundaries.
The only way to do that, to establish boundaries before they've been, before somebody has violated them, before you've been in a bad experience, is to rely on other people to tell you about potential things in one way or another. That doesn't mean like necessarily an individual telling you to your face, but to be aware of it as a possibility, it has to be something that someone has experienced and you have some awareness of it, right? So like that standard example that we just said of no work calls after 5, I can set that preemptively because I know that it is a thing that sometimes happens. Whether or not it will happen with me, I know it sometimes happens to some people, so let me establish the boundary right off the bat. Okay. But if there's some boundary of mine that might get violated that I have no awareness of, or nobody's ever experienced, how am I supposed to predict that, right? So what you're talking about, this paralysis thing back in that perfectionism stuff, is really more general than just boundaries. It's about, I'm not going to move until I can predict everything about this situation and know for sure that there will be no downsides to it, that there will be no boundary issues or whatever. And there's value to that. Now, you said, where's the line on how much is thinking about it too much? You know me well enough by now to know I can't tell you what the line is, but it's good to be aware that there is a line. It's a point of diminishing returns. Like at a certain point, you are exploring things that are so unlikely to happen that it's really maybe not worth what you're putting into exploring those things. How we can ever say that? Or maybe sometimes you think it's something, oh, I should, I'm now overdoing it, I should stop. And it turns out like, I should have kept going. You learn and you go. But that's also why that I like this concept of proactive boundaries. And I'll say that I've made up these phrases, but I wouldn't be surprised if other people have made up, have used the same phrases or the same concepts. I just don't know of them. Otherwise, I'd point you in that direction. But that's why the proactive boundaries thing is so important, because everything is finite, right? That's the whole premise of everything we talk about. Your attention, your awareness, your time, your energy, everything is limited. The more of it you fill with stuff that you want, the less is available for anybody else or anything else to take. So reactive boundaries are good. It's better to be able to say, nope, that's too much. I'm not taking my boss's call at 7 p.m. It's better to say that than to just take your boss's call anytime your boss wants to call. But being reactive means two things. One, like you just pointed out, I pointed out earlier, and you pointed out, one of the big problems with that is I can't do it until it's happening. I can't, like even if I preemptively set the boundary of no work calls after 5, I can't enforce that until somebody's trying to call me and then I don't answer, or I do answer and say, I'm not taking this call, or whatever I do to enforce it. The thing still has to happen for me to enforce the boundary, and I have to enforce the boundary. That takes some of my time and energy. And, the amount of times that I've had, I don't do the same more, but early on, like I would get a text from a client that's in crisis or whatever on a Friday night, and I would say, okay, I'm not going to, I shouldn't say in crisis. If they're in crisis, I, respond and handle it. But that has a question about something, or, had a fight with their parents or something that they want to talk through or whatever, right? That even then, if I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to get back to this until tomorrow morning or Monday morning or whatever, then I'm still thinking about it that whole damn time. And it still is taking up a bunch of my resources. Even though I enforced the boundary, it still took something that I didn't want it to take, right? So that's the problem with reactive. It's better, but it has its costs. Proactive is better even than reactive, because it means that there's no way for somebody to come in and do whatever because they don't have the time. The boss can't ask me I don't have to tell my boss, no, I can't come in on the weekends to enforce my boundary. I legitimately can't come in on the weekend because my weekend is full of this other thing. It doesn't have to be an arbitrary enforcement where I'm trying to explain to people why it's a healthy boundary. I have real reasons that I can't do those things. And even more than that, if you think of it in terms of like every time you text somebody, the likelihood that they are going to text you goes up. And every time somebody texts you and you don't text back, the likelihood that they're going to text you again goes down. So proactive boundaries in that sense of I'm spending my energies and my attentions where I want them to be. And naturally my life kind of fills into that pattern where most of my stuff is taken up by that and other things don't try to come in as much. The classic kind of like when you see somebody on the street, getting signatures for a mayoral candidate or whatever, and you don't want to talk to them. And it's like, you get into that. I'm walking with purpose. I look busy and urgent and I'm looking ahead. I don't have time to stuff. It's that we have ways of messaging to people. I don't have time for you right now. And people respond to that. Even if it is a person who's going to try and violate that boundary, it's going to be that much harder for them to do when you're purposeful and looking straight ahead because you've got somewhere to be than when you're like trying to avoid looking at them because this is awkward.
We usually have
in fact, some cases. Go ahead.
About that, we have like a few questions that like kind of like would be best addressed in this kind of manner. So start off with one that's a little bit easier. Probably someone has gone through. Everyone's probably experienced this one. It's like, I feel like every time I lay out clear boundaries for myself, people get mad at me. Is there like a nice way to say, no, I don't want to help you move out of your apartment. I don't care if you're offering, last part got cut off, pizza and beer. So this is a pretty common one. Like we talk about, like, I mean, everyone's experience is like, oh, help me move. And it's like, oh, I'm conveniently busy on whatever day that is. But
this is, I feel like, especially during your 20s and early 30s, this is like happens a lot. And then it's like one of those unwritten rules kind of thing of like, once you're 35, don't ask your friends to move for pizza and beer kind of thing. These like weird rules that exist. I'm pretty sure that's one of them. I don't have any evidence to back that up. Yeah, no. Is there a nice way to say it? So it's spectrum, not a binary, right? There's not a nice and a mean way to say it. There's nicer versus meaner. And of course, we've defined what does nice mean. Really, what we're trying to say here is probably two things, I'm guessing. And if the person who asked this question is here, you can clarify. But number one, what is a way to say it that makes it like least likely to head towards conflict or confrontation? Nice way meaning that, like, how do I say it without having to like get into a thing? And two, how do I say it in a way that doesn't communicate something inaccurate to the other person in terms of you're not important to me? Like, I'm not going to help you because I don't value you, right? How do I communicate that I value you and I care about you and I feel for you in this situation, but it's still not something I'm going to do?
Just don't care about them enough, apparently. No.
Well, I mean, in a sense, yes, in like the cost and value equation kind of thing, but also like, is that a bad thing? And I don't think so. That's especially when we're talking about boundaries. Part of the reason that this concept is one of those kind of popular, pop psychology concepts is because of how hard it is to do naturally, but how important it is to do. Like naturally, everyone is going to want to say yes to everybody else, especially the more that you like them and the more that they like you, the more you're going to want to say yes, regardless of the cost, So to have this concept of boundaries as, no, it's okay for me to say no because it's healthy. Yeah. But, we have talked about, I think I've talked about on this stream in the past, that any like psychological concept that conveniently allows you to not help people is worth questioning. And boundaries is one of those things, right? It's worth questioning. Does that mean you should help everyone do everything? No, of course not. But does that mean I'm going to say no to every person who asks me for help because boundaries? No, of course not. I got to be more specific and find that nuance, like middle ground for me. So the other thing about, is there a nice way to say it, is it depends on the person and it depends on the ask. But generally, I think usually what you're talking about is how do you communicate to the person that you value them, that you understand why they're asking, and that it's okay that they asked, or maybe it's not. But in the case where you're wanting to be nice, I'm assuming that it's okay that your friend asked and you understand the predicament that they're in, but you still don't want to do it. And I said don't want to, not can't, because those are two different things. But generally speaking, one is going to be to communicate exactly what I just said. To say, hey, I care about you and I know what you're up against and it sucks, but sorry, no. Now, if you have something else that you're willing to do to help or think might be helpful, that's different than what you were asked to do, you can throw that in there too. Sorry, I can't come help you move, but if you're struggling to afford movers, I can like chip in $20 towards a GoFundMe for you or something like that, or I can drive the U-Haul from one place to the next for you, or something, like run trips back. You can offer something else that does work for you. But really, you just need to communicate that I care about you, even though I'm saying no. It's not that I don't value, it's what we always talk about, cost and value. Everybody assumes it's always the value varying, that if you say no, it's because you don't value me. If I can communicate to you, no, I value you very highly, and the cost of this thing is so high that I just can't, right? That becomes a lot easier though when you are good with your proactive boundaries, when you have actual things and actual reasons. Or cook, that's a good suggestion from Kid Squatch. Yeah, offer to cook and bring food over. Offer what you can if that's important to you. Now, sometimes the nice way means avoiding conflict. I don't actually want my boss to I'm not going to offer something else. I don't care about communicating that I value them. I just don't want to have to get into an argument about it. And sometimes people will probably be surprised when I say this because I'm all big on authenticity. Sometimes just lie. Like it's something we do anyway. Sometimes just lie. I can't. I'm sorry. I've got a doctor's appointment that day. I can't. I'm sorry. Whatever. Just if you're going to do that, just make sure that it's a lie that you don't have to worry about later, because that's where people get in trouble, is like they come up with something with, any lie, this is part of the cost, right? Is I remember something different than what actually happened in case I'm asked a question.
I think after next week's topic, how to lie effectively.
I'll do it. I'll talk about it. I like to call lying managing information. I'm trying to control who knows what, right? And sometimes there are people who are going to try and violate your boundaries and are going to be rude and confrontational about you saying no, unless you have a good reason to get them off your back. And do I feel bad about lying to a person like that to get them off my back? No, I don't. If you had been willing to accept it when I just said no, I wouldn't have lied. But I'm also not wanting to get into a big argument with you, acquaintance level friend about whether or not I'm technically available to come move you. I'm just going to say I can't. So I tried to clarify whether are you trying to avoid conflict or are you trying to communicate that you value the other person. I feel the same way, by the way, about cheating academically. That cheating rules are arbitrary.
Yeah.
Some people do pay people to do their essays and they do just fine. Some people care more about following the rules. Some people care more about whether or not they can get caught. Me, you get to do one thing your best, everything else gets your minimum effort. Now, usually cheating and lying, I think, is not worth it because of the stress and the worry about covering up for it, or what if you get caught, even if it's unlikely, that's why I love authenticity. I don't have to remember anything other than the truth. It's very easy.
So on this, because I like where we're going with this, but this next question is like a step further than that one previous that someone had submitted. And I had to cut it down a little bit because it's a little longer, but I have a friend going through something awful. I want to be there, but it's exhausting, especially when I'm going through my own mental health stuff. How can I be a good friend without burning out? So this is more than just oh yeah, I'm help me move. And it's oh, you have alternatives. You could do this. This is this is something that everyone will probably face at some point in their life.
Yeah, I see. One of the hardest things about doing the job that I do is that a lot of times people are facing a situation where every option is a bad option, and they're hoping that there's some secret that they don't know, an extra option that avoids all bad, all negative sides of every other possibility. And this kind of is one. There's a zero-sum game here. My mentor, Andy Mahoney, talked about this concept that I love, is the equal exchange of energy. For a relationship to be sustainable, there has to be an equal exchange of energy. Does that mean always in each interaction is equal? No. But over time, it has to be roughly equal. Otherwise, it will fall apart. And that's not something that we like to admit, because again, people want to focus on the value. Oh, if you're a good friend, you would be willing to push yourself and suffer and have your own burnouts in order to support me through my burnouts if you really cared about me, right? And of course, in the practicality, it's different from situation to situation. But if a relationship is one-sided, if one person is getting more out of it than the other, it's gonna end sooner or later. So we can reframe that to help people feel less guilty about this, in terms of, do you want to do as much as you can? Think about it in terms of a job, for example, right? Do you want to do as much as you can and be as productive as you can for 3 weeks and then burn out and lose the job and not be able to do any more? Or be as helpful as you can to your friend for a month or two and then burn out and never talk to them again and never be helpful to them again in the future? Or do you want to kind of find a way to balance it out and titrate it and figure out how to be supportive in a way that is sustainable, whether that's because you're getting as much support back from them, even if it's blocked up in different chunks or whatever, or whatever. This is one of the reasons that therapists charge money, because obviously, anybody who does this work, well, I would assume, hopefully it's not always true, but
Yeah.
anyone who does this work wants to help people, likes helping people. They're not doing it to get rich, But there's just a natural thing that cannot be overcome of, if a relationship is one-sided, the person that is having things taken more than given becomes less and less likely to want to be in that situation, even if they keep putting themselves in it. So how it balances out in therapy is that one party is giving the other party money as their form of energy to balance out the equal exchange of energy, right? I would never talk to a friend the way that I talk to my clients and focus only on them and never talk about my own stuff for months or however long that we're meeting. Cecil will tell you, I complain to him all the time.
So in this situation, there's let's say someone's going through crisis or whatever it is. And what if it's short term and you realize oh, this is a one-time thing and they need a lot of support right now and I can't give it to them because, something else is happening. But I mean, because I think about that stream we did talking about if someone's, in prefrontal cortex shutdown, they're just kind of oh, you're trying to help them get out of that situation, but you're not able to so I assume this question was more about could possibly not. But
yeah, well, so here's some practical, some practical things, and any of these things may or may not be applicable to the person asking this question or anybody else experiencing this, but I'll just throw different possibilities out there. One is to take on some of the job of communication and asking for support for them. So kind of the premise here is that the only way to support my friend is to listen to them complain about it and vent about it and cry about it and be there for them and shut up about my own stuff. And maybe that's not what this person meant, but that's at least part of what is coming across to me. There's lots of different ways to help. And some other ones might be ones that you're better suited to, that maybe rather than me being there for you every night to hold you while you cry, maybe I'm going to text your other friends. I'll ask you first and I'll text your other friends and call your family and say, hey, this person's really struggling and I want to be there for them. And I think you guys probably do too. Can we kind of set up some arrangement where we're all checking in with this person, right? So that it doesn't all fall on one person. Same with, are there things that you can do to support them that you find enjoyable? Can I, catch butts throughout cooking, right? Do I like to cook? If so, can I cook them something and bring them that? And that's kind of a way of helping support them in a way that doesn't drain me, or at least doesn't drain me as much. Also, things that the two of you both find enjoyable. Talking through things and feeling your feelings is good and it's valid. It's not always helpful, like there is that body mind kind of balance, right? That sometimes you are wallowing, sometimes you are more in your head that is helpful, and you need to be pulled out of it. And so, do me and my friend both love snowboarding? Cool, let's go snowboarding and just get you out of here. Again, this isn't like pop culture, right? It's like we got to get you out, go to the bar, like you just need to have a fun night. Like that's a way to help, depending on the person and the activity, that may or may not be as draining for you, or may even be fun for you, And of course, at the root of it is really like trust. Trust meaning that even though I am going through a lot to support you right now, and you're not supporting me in it, I trust you and I trust our relationship, and I know it will come back to me later on, so I can kind of push through farther. But no matter how much you trust there, you're going to hit a limit sooner or later. And the other thing too, and this talking about boundaries, communicate that all the time and as early as possible. Sometimes people get stuck in this idea that, oh, I can't say this is a drain for me because then they'll feel like a burden. And that can happen. So you got to pay attention to the specifics and how you communicate it in the relationship. But it's better to set things up in advance and say, like, I'm here to support you, but I got to say, like, it's pulling me away from other things. I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty, but I don't want this to go to a place where a week from now I can't show up for you and it's out of the blue. I want you and I to work together to figure out how I can support you in a way that doesn't mean that a week from now I'm going to be ghosting you. Right? That better to give advance notice. It's not always easy, but the other option is like burning out and disappearing or blowing up all at once, and that's worse.
Okay, so that's like, I love the idea of like, establishing this and having it all, but in real time, it's like if someone asks something of me, I'm like, my first response is like, oh yeah, I want to do that for you. I will easily overextend myself and commit but in all sense, like, oh yeah, I want to do this. And then moments later, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or like whatever else. So how do we deal with like establishing these boundaries as a reactive sense of like, maybe I didn't commit, but someone asked me and I'm going, oh no, now I have that boundary. How do I like deal with that? Like, I just like,
well, I mean, I know you set this question up as like a different thing than the moving question, but it's not really. At the end of the day, you say something like, look, I want to be here for you, but this is killing me, and I don't think I can keep doing this. Here are my other ideas of how I can support you in a way that like will actually work for me. I love you, but I can't sit in your apartment for a 6th night in a row and just have you cry and not be able to do anything about it. It's too hard for me to see you go through pain that I'm not doing anything to make better. I'm just being there to see it and hear it, that we could say like, okay, we've been doing this for a while. Partly it's hard because it's not enjoyable. You don't even have to mention that part, but you could say it's not doing anything for you. Like it doesn't seem like it's helping. I mean, it's better to be with me than be alone, but it doesn't change anything. What about this? What if we try this? What if we go here or do that? Or hell, what if, honestly, the person who's like talking about all this, going through all this is by definition somebody who likes talking through things, or they wouldn't be, this is our premise that we're kind of making up. It's not in the question, but the idea of, well, people like that a lot of the time tend to do better or get better by helping other people. So, you know what? This is not me being selfish, or maybe it is in some way or whatever, but how about I tell you about some of the stuff I'm going through, and maybe that'll help you get like a perspective on, or see something different, or maybe not. Maybe you can help me and that'll feel better. I don't know, but these are the suggestions that I have, friend.
So like his response is like, ask, let me think or check my schedule. And I like that idea too.
Yeah, I that is a great way yourself to get some space. Let me think about it. Let me check my schedule. Let me talk to my significant other and see what's going on or whatever. Of course, that's more likely to be helpful the less close you are with the person, and the less like urgent and emotional whatever it is that they're asking for help for is. We had a comment earlier too from Kitchwatch again, said you'll find out over time if a friendship is balanced or not. Be aware for friends that only take because they go through something awful time and time again, which, yeah. And that's another way of saying what we've been saying, which is that one-sided relationships can only last for so long. Unbalanced relationships can only last for so long. So we can frame it this way, that I'm watching out for somebody taking more than they give or not. But either way, there's a limit. Sooner or later, it'll be done.
So on that, sorry, I just like I'm going through question after question, but there's a lot of ones.
The questions are good.
It's like, so we've dealt with the personal relationship of like, oh, I can't, helping establish the boundaries between what you can and can't do and how to do that a little bit. Here's this next one that we're all going to start facing. Someone who is not socially driven. This is something that seems very like, I was like, yes, I want to hear the answer to this question. How do I get better about not overcommitting to social gatherings now that people are getting vaccinated? I mean, I struggled with being committed to social interactions before COVID, and now it's like afterwards, I'm like, I have to do that again.
Well, so this is a really good question. I want to get a little bit in depth on this, because this is more relevant to neurodivergent people, partly because of masking, which I think we may have talked about or not.
You mentioned it, but I don't know if we did it in this stream.
Masking, usually what people mean by this, the like more reduced version of it, is I'm acting normal, like rather than my weird self, I'm acting like a normie, right? I think it's more nuanced and more helpful to talk about it in terms of I am bypassing my default responses, my easiest go-to, like what I would otherwise do, and putting effort into doing something different, whether that's holding back from interrupting somebody or stopping myself from sharing a personal story that helps me to relate, or whether that's following social rules that don't make sense to me, but that I know exist and I have to remind myself, and whatever. People do it. Everybody does it. The more different you are from the norm, the more you do it. And a lot of what's happened over this past year is that a lot of us have been masking a lot less. When people talk to you about thriving in some ways, or even globally, like across the board, they've been thriving in order to navigate social situations. That's why you do masking, is like, I don't want people to think I'm weird. I don't want people to reject me. I want people to, be accepted.
Or just be able to function.
I want to be able to move through this social interaction as smoothly as possible. Maybe I want something from it. Maybe I just want to get out of it. But either way, I'm trying to do it without conflict, without being called out, or, be made fun of, or without hurting anyone. Like, that's more my issue, right? Is I clearly like to talk and I relate with personal stories and things. And I know that sometimes people take that as, oh, they're not listening to me, they just want to talk about themselves. And I don't want to give anyone that impression. So I'm trying to do it for that reason, not just to because I'm worried about them being mean to me, right? So, and again, this is what I'm saying, everybody does this. It's a guessing game of trying to read the other people's minds and what their expectations are. But the more you fit within the norm in a particular context or process, the less effort you need to put into guessing other people's expectations and responses and things like that. As an example, if you're in college and you go to a keg party, and you don't drink, that's going to take more effort to navigate than if you go there and you do drink and you're drinking with everybody else, because that's what you already want to do, is more in line with what people are doing there. But anyway, a lot of people have been unmasking, really just putting less effort into masking because they've been less around the people that they usually mask around. And now coming out of this, to some extent, it's this is so complicated.
Yeah.
Because your skills don't atrophy, right? You don't lose the things that you were able to do before, but reaccessing them or reminding yourself of why it matters or it's worth doing can be very difficult. But also, a lot of the social norms that we all had, whether you were following them just because that's how you operated naturally or because you'd learned and practiced and were doing it effortfully, are different now. Part of this whole process has been things of like, do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? Is it okay to be in the person's house or not, and different people have different rules about it. There's no general consensus. This happens a lot with technology too. It changes so quickly that there's not time for a general like social consensus to evolve kind of naturally, organically. We either force a conversation or we don't, and we all just do what we think is right. And other people, is it rude to text while you're hanging out with somebody? Yes or no? Some people will say yes, some will say no. And when those two people hang out together and one texts, and there's a conflict. So having said all that, this is the thing everybody needs to navigate. Some people are going to have more to have to put into it than not. And yeah, the thing I didn't finish earlier is people who've been thriving, it's quite likely, or at least it's worth examining. Am I thriving because I was spending resources on masking that have now freed up and I'm able to spend on these other things? And how much of that am I willing to give up in order to get back to whatever other things? This question in particular, though, this process, whether it's this or anything else, it's about testing your limits. It's trial and error. So that's how it always works, right? We commit to a thing or make a plan for a thing that we think will work, think will be good, even if what we're thinking is, I don't want to do this, but I can get through it for this person or whatever. And then it turns out, oh no, I can't get through it. You are going to hit your point of failure if you are attempting anything, right? So one option is to just not do them at all, or to only do things that you already know you're capable of doing. Like, I know that I can go to one party a month and be okay, cool. But if you're trying to kind of expand, which this question is kind of getting at, this particular situation, what it's really saying is, I am intending to go to more social gatherings now than I have been doing. How do I do that? How do I increase my attendance of social gatherings without overcommitting, or meaning putting myself in a situation where I'm in trouble, right? Go slow. That's really all it is. If you commit to 10 things before you've tried anything, then you might have a real painful experience coming up. If you try okay, let me try one thing this weekend and see what happens. Okay, that went okay. Next week, let me see if I can do one thing on the weekend, and I'll take this one other thing on the Wednesday and see. And just, you'll still hit your failure point, but if you're building slowly and gradually, that failure point should hopefully be just over the line of what you can do, rather than way past the line.
Okay, so going back to earlier, you said things that take more energy so that we tend to do. So if someone texts you and then you text back, it's more likely to establish that. So what if you're someone like me who has a very low social threshold, and I want to be social with people because I know that is something that people enjoy, but for me it's a whole bunch. And so if you keep turning down those events or those invites or those experiences or whatever else, then it's those relationships start to atrophy because you're not able to, you become basically that person who's oh, I need you to give me all the time and space, and I need you to be okay with that, but you're not, it doesn't feel very two-way on that. So what about that?
Yeah, it's not two-way, and that's one of the things that needs to be taken into consideration. It is hard to text somebody and not get a response. Nobody likes that. Now, the more that you communicate, and we can talk about you and me, Cecil, because this is a thing that happens with us, right?
What?
That I'll text you and not get a response. Nobody likes that. Nobody. If you look at the Gottman Institute, their research, they call these invitations or bids for attention. When you bid for somebody's attention, when you're saying, hey, I want your attention for a moment, and you don't get it, you don't like it. You wouldn't have reached out for the attention in the first place if you didn't want it. Now, other factors can mitigate that. The more, Cecil, that you are able to communicate to somebody that you're not responding to a text is not because you're not interested in the offer, or for whatever reason it might be, the more I can then say, okay, he's not responding, but it's not because he's rejecting me or doesn't want to hear from me. It's because he's probably overwhelmed. And so that's easier for me to let go and move on from than it is if I'm oh God, is he just mad at me? Why isn't he responding to me? Right? Yeah. Now, but communicating is the problem. That's what you're avoiding in the first place, is that communication takes a lot. There are limits. The more you're able to communicate these things, the better it will go. But every time that you don't respond to a text, it is going to become more difficult for the person to text you again in the future. Does that mean they'll like you less? Not necessarily. It depends on the context. But yeah, if it's not a value judgment, you know what I mean? Like we often feel as though it is like, oh, they're not inviting me because they don't like me anymore because I said no too many times. When really it's just, no, they're not inviting me because every time they invite me, I say no. So why would they continue to invite me if I'm just going to say no again? But it doesn't feel that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to earlier what we were talking about, one of our previous streams about communication. A lot of things go back to that of just, we have all these assumptions and we go about our day as if that's everyone's on the same page, and going back to those basics essentially, and
right.
Establishing that
clear. I wouldn't, if I wasn't responding to a text, it would only be because I'm mad at somebody. Therefore, them not responding to my text makes me think they're mad at me.
Yeah. But
again, if you don't communicate, and communication is not just language, not just text, you know, I mean, I guess it's all language, but it's not just spoken, you know, verbal or written language. But if all you communicate is I don't want to hear from you, and there's no communication balancing that out to say, no, I do want to hear from you, even though I did these other things, then a person is going to think that you don't want to hear from them, and they're going to stop reaching out. And it might be respectful. It might be, I mean, certainly this is the case with you and me, Cecil, right? That there are times where I'm like, I want to reach out so bad, but I know he's overwhelmed and I don't want to add to his plate or make him feel obligated to get back to me, so I won't reach out. And that can only be clarified with communication, you know. So there are limits. Kitchquatch has been adding some comments about overthinking things. And yeah, that's a big part of this, especially in terms of, like we've talked in the past, considering how someone might respond to what I'm saying, what they might interpret out of what I'm saying, and rethinking and rephrasing and redeveloping over and over until I can come up with something perfect that has no possibility for them to take any way other than which doesn't really exist. So you just think forever and ever. Plus, remember that the brain doesn't have a mechanism to allow it to distinguish between real things and non-real things. We use logic for that. We use communication for that. But intrinsically, yeah, sometimes people are just at work, yeah. But intrinsically, we don't. So every time you imagine, oh, if I say this, they're going to yell at me, then it's kind of like you're experiencing them yelling at you. Every time you think through the various ways they could reject you, it feels a little bit like rejection, and it becomes that much harder to reach out to the person, because even though they didn't actually do anything, you have now been rejected by them 200 times in the last 24 hours. So, man, if you're going to reach out now, it's got to be a lot.
Yeah, this question too, kind of like, that goes with that too, is like, you know, as people to specifically keep inviting me to things, even though I can't always make it. I want to see them, but there's a cost. Scheduling distance work, but I generally miss people. I mean, yeah, this is the flip side, I guess not flip side, but other side to this as well, is while I struggle feeling bad saying no to people because I'm like, I don't think I have it to be social, there are those people who are wanting to but can't for so many reasons, like life.
You're not different though. You're arbitrarily separating yourself out from that category. You still want to see. This is okay. Talking about psychology concepts that become popular. Introvert, extrovert is one for exactly this reason. To be able to explain to people, I'm an introvert and I like being around people, but it drains me, so I can only do so much. That's like kind of the most popular conceptualization of what an introvert is somebody who is drained by being around people, even if they like it. Now, in reality, that's not a thing. No personality thing is actually a thing in reality. You are not always drained by people. You might be drained by parties. You might be drained by whatever, but just as a universal thing, people like being with other people if it's happening in the right way. You're talking about how much you don't like being social, Cecil, but do you enjoy being with Aaron?
Yeah, but that's a good point. Okay.
So yes, we like being with other people. It's just the way that it happens. And there are some things that we like, even though if you go back when we were talking about energy management and the cost of how much energy something takes and the energy that it returns, enjoyable things return energy. So I can go to a party that's enjoyable, but still costs me more than I get back out of it. but some social interactions I'm going to get more out of than it costs me. And sometimes there are going to be things where I'm like, yeah, I would definitely get more out of that than it costs me, but I can't afford the cost this week. Like I just don't have it in me to put on those clothes and get to that place, no matter how fun I think it will be. And of course, I think most of us have been in that situation where we're like, I'm not going to comment. You've got a comment to you. You got to respond to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice because it feels not like the same. I feel like it could be a weird, awkward person, the person that I am more than I can in most social situations, because I realize in a social situation, I'm a lot to handle. At least I like to think that, because I'm
honestly, for a lot of neurodivergent people, he doesn't have to respond. You're right. He doesn't have to respond. A lot of this, a lot of our communication takes place outside of this 1 hour. We talk and interact all the time. So, no, I lost my train of thought. Oh, weirdness. Yeah, honestly, a lot of the time for neurodivergent people, that hesitation is about the masking. The draining is about the masking. I love being around people. I am energized by being around people. But if I have to mask and make sure that I'm not talking too much and I'm not sharing too many personal stories and I'm not interrupting anybody and various other things, I'm not fidgeting, or that I'm not looking away, which actually helps me to listen and focus a lot of the time instead of watching somebody. The more I do that, the more it drains me. And so, yeah, my issue with being around people is not that I don't like being around people. It's that I think I'm weird and I'm too much and I'm too intense. Even in this context right now, where people are specifically here so that we can talk about these things, I have a constant thought running through my head of, I'm talking too much. I'm talking too much. So to deal with that is a lot. And yeah, we're all weird and awkward. I mean, everybody is. Everybody's unique, but some of us are more different in ways that are more impactful or come up more often or whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, this is like, okay. I was saying, like, this is why I struggle, like, I mean, any social interaction, it's just, they're difficult for me because I'm like, I want to make sure everyone's like taken care of and I'm not too much. And like that whole thing is just super draining. It's why I don't like having groups of people and introducing friends to each other, is I'm just like, I don't have it in me to hold that. And like that just thought is enough to like exhaust me. Well, and I'm like, I can't manage this. So
yeah. Rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, right? When we talked about that, it's about vigilance. These are people I don't know, and I don't know how they'll react. So like the question we just said about overcommitting, I'm going to slowly titrate how I'm releasing this and that and this and that and see how they respond, which is a much more effortful process than just doing whatever you want. And Kid Scratch says, so don't, which is great advice sometimes, don't titrate yourself. Don't like hold yourself back. Can be great advice depending on the context, but it's not always great advice because sometimes there is actual danger. And I don't necessarily mean physical danger, although sometimes there is physical danger. I mean, talk about Pride Month, like sometimes there is physical danger involved with revealing who you really are around people you don't know. But there's danger that's physical too, like none of us, for example, in a job interview are going into a job interview for a job we want and not putting some effort into monitoring how we're acting and being careful about what we're saying. It doesn't mean it's disingenuous, because that's the flip side I get from people all the time is masking. I love the format of this because we move from one topic to another. We start with boundaries and now we're talking more about masking. But there's an inherent, like, I don't like the phrase masking. I don't normally use it. I'm using it in this context because it's a more commonly known phrase, because the implication is that the way that you are behaving is not really you, that you are putting on a mask and presenting a version of, being something that you're not. And that's not what it is. There's nothing that you can do that you can't do. There's nothing you can say or think or feel that you can't say or think or feel. Now, it might be more effortful to act in that way. It might be more draining or less natural or whatever, but you're still capable of doing it. And all of us switch from context to context how we behave and how we talk and how we react to people. That is supposed to happen. So it is not you being fake to be polite or to mask or to follow a rule and maintain eye contact, even though I know making eye contact makes me intensely uncomfortable and I actually can't hear a word you're saying because of how uncomfortable I am with this eye contact, but I know that you think it's respectful, so I'm doing it. Like, does that mean I'm being fake? No. It just means that I can't hear what you're saying, you know? I don't find a lot of use in that concept of being fake. It's okay to be professional in a professional environment, and it's okay to be relaxed in a relaxed environment. You know, when somebody does not adjust their behavior based on the context, they speak exactly the same and act exactly the same, regardless of where they are and who's around, dress exactly the same. That's, you know, we would qualify that as like severe mental illness, like delusional, you know?
Yeah. I like this comment that it's like, you know, loving your neurodiverse friends is like learning their programming languages. People who are neurotypical can learn their friend's version of brain analytics or Python or OS X. Not so you can control them, but so you can read their language and help them be more comfortable. This is like really true, very true. That speaks to me because I feel like, I'm always trying to learn people's languages because, you know, and figure it out so I can put them at ease because I feel like I have that weird programming too that's like hard to figure out.
I like that metaphor a lot. You know, we've talked about it, but every person speaks a different language. And my language overlaps with your language in certain ways, right? But it will never be 100%. So the more that we learn and are able to get it to overlap more, the better. So I like this too. And especially because it, you know, to extend this metaphor is to say that, ND people run Linux or whatever, whereas most people run Apple OS or, you know, Windows, right? So there's more kind of decent overlap there. Of course, I'm building out this metaphor in my head now and expanding it not just to the programming language, but to the whole computer. Like what specific programs and data each of us has is different, but having that like base to rely on is going to be easier than when I'm trying to send a file to somebody that runs Linux. You know, I'm going to have to put a lot more effort into getting that file across to you if I am on Windows and you're on Linux.
Yeah, unless you're masking and then you're building a virtual machine that runs like a GUI that's more acceptable to that, and then you do the work on your end. It's a whole thing to itself. But I do want to say, there's another comment about that that was a follow-up. Says like, you know, would code switching be more appropriate? Code switching is like a term that exists into itself, and it's a very valuable and important term, especially for people who are marginalized. A lot of minorities use that. You kind of similar to this, but not necessarily the same.
Well, fundamentally, it is the same. It's about having different identities that you interact with people through and switching from one to the next. Now, the application, obviously, you're right, Cecil. Like usually, that is used in the context of people who have to develop the ability to be more acceptable. But that is what masking is, you know, like neurodivergent people are also marginalized people. But that also gets at really, you know, what we were just talking about, language, that different things mean different things to different people. So to some people, the term code switching has a very specific and important meaning. And to then hear somebody else use it to mean something different, it can be upsetting or uncomfortable or angering or enraging or whatever, because I have found comfort in that word and now you're using it to mean a different thing than what I know it to mean. So if I have a heart, I either now have to make space to understand that there are different ways to use the word, which takes resources, takes space, or I have to think, okay, maybe I've been using it wrong, and now the comfort I've found in this word is I don't have anymore because I was wrong about what code switching meant or whatever. But yes, that is why I didn't use code switching, because it's a phrase like that. But that's the same with masking. That's why I did use masking, because even though they do on a fundamental level mean the same thing, Masking is the word that is more often used in the neurodivergent community, where code switching is used in particular for BIPOC, but also I believe it's very common in the LGBT community.
Because I have my straight man voice instead of my typical normal femi voice. Yeah.
Yeah, well, co-opt and reclaim, all these things. I mean, there are arguments in any community about should we use this term. One that's more like an ND kind of thing is time blindness, for example. That some people will say, well, that's an ableist term because it's using blindness to refer to something that's not about vision. It's referring as a deficit and whatever. And then people will say, well, okay, what do you want to call it? And, oh man, you want to get into like language and reclaiming things versus co-opting things and whatever in the trans or just the gender, non-conforming or non-traditional gender conforming community. Debates about language that, are ongoing and will never end. Because if I have identified myself as this and I found comfort in that and it means this specific thing to me, and now you're identifying yourself as the same word, but you're different and you're not doing some of the things that I do, it's like, no, you're not really this, I'm really this. And generally, this is why I have that rule about I don't ever want to take anything away from anybody else. Any word that I use, part of the reason I'm so clear about defining those things is so that I am being clear about what I mean when I say it, so that I don't step on anybody's toes. That when I say, what a positive goal is versus a negative goal, I define that because if other people use those terms and I don't know if they do, it's not possible to know what every single person uses every word to mean. But if it's useful to them and it's different than what I say, then I want to be clear about what I'm saying so that it's clear that we might be using the same phrase to mean different things, but we're really saying different things. Yeah, queer.
Queer is a good one. I use that term a lot. But yeah, I realize that for a lot of cis-hets, that's a problematic term, and that's fine with me because I'm fine with cis-hets having to dance around that. Sorry.
Well, something personal for me is like the term BIPOC, which I appreciate and find very valuable as somebody who's mixed race. It is exclusionary for me, right? Because, and this does not mean that anybody should not use BIPOC. They should. But no one can predict every person's response to something. And I have my own personal issues with, because I'm half white, does that mean that I count as a person of color? If I say that I'm a person of color, will other people come back and be like, you're half white and you're almost white passing or, close to white passing. Am I allowed to use? And then once I saw people starting to use the term BIMPOC, which Black, Indigenous, Mixed Race and People of Color, I felt so seen in that moment. When I first saw that phrase, I felt so welcome and included, and I've seen it like 3 times and never again. So most of the time I'm like, well, I'm not white enough to be white, but I'm too white to not be white, so I'm just nothing, But that one moment when someone said, I exist,
I don't think we've gone over for boundaries to these embracing these labels that make us feel seen.
Well, I mean, it's all related. That's why we go wherever it goes, because how much energy does it take you to go through a thing partly depends on the language that you're speaking and the language other people are speaking. And, I'm sitting here in my suburban town, this cute little town that I like to live in. And there are pride flags all over the place, which I love because that communicates something. Now, does it mean that every person here is accepting and open? Nope. There's definitely people that aren't, but it does communicate something that all through the center of the town, the village, whatever, that there are these flags hanging from. And Cecil, maybe you can help me remember the specific name for this specific flag. I know it's not a pride flag. I
think it's the Philadelphia one, but I'm not sure.
It's not the Philadelphia one. It's the one with the triangle of the trans colors and then the brown and black coming in from the side. Because Philadelphia is just brown and black added to the bottom, right?
I believe so. Well,
my webcam is built in, so I can't show you, but it doesn't matter.
But also maybe one they just put. I forget what it's called. I should know these things, but
whatever it is, it's language.
Yeah.
Symbols are language. We're communicating things to people, and there's a clear message being sent of you're safe here. Now, anybody will know that doesn't actually mean I'm totally safe here, but each one of those markers makes me feel more safe or more likely that I'm safe, and I can relax a little bit, even if it's not all the way. right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like if instead there were Nazi symbols hanging from the poles around here, you would feel differently, you know? It would be more vigilant. All right, we got to wrap up. I got to go meet with somebody.
Oh,
this was fun,
it's 2:00. We just went off this whole thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you guys, everybody, for joining us again here at Effective Artistry. This is not therapy hour. Oh, the progress flag. There we go. Thank you, Heather, for that.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys, you can find us on Twitter or Instagram at Effective Artistry. You check our website. Feel free to contact us at any time. We're people, and thank you guys for joining and participating.
Thank you, Kid Squatch and Heather, for talking in the chat so much today. I appreciate that. When we have this whole thing set up, right now my office is really the only like set up room, but we'll
do tour and stuff.
It's all set up. So. All right, good to be with you all. I will see you next week.
Cool, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.